Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Ray Wilson, for inviting me to be your speaker today. He's joining us remotely, and congratulations on his 60th anniversary next April 30th. I want to start my sermon by telling you and sharing a story which goes back to 2006, 20 years ago, when my wife, Violet, invited me to go see a movie with her. How many of you enjoy going out to see the movies? All right, almost everybody. We love seeing movies. We went out to see a film called An Inconvenient Truth. Oh, it sounds like some of you have seen it. By raise of hands, how many of you have seen this movie? For those of you who haven't, it was a documentary film about global warming and climate change featuring former Vice President Al Gore giving a slideshow presentation on this topic. And I remember walking out of the movie theater that day with my wife thinking, gee, if what I heard today was true, and I wasn't sure, I wasn't doubtful, but I wasn't sure, I thought, we don't have 100 years to solve this problem, maybe just 30 or 40 years. And at that time, my children, who I put up here on the screen, Gareth and Shelley, were only 6 and 9 years old. That's Gareth on the left, me visiting his kindergarten class. He'd made me a tie with his handprint on it. That's my daughter, Shelley, with grandma, my mother, doing something they love together out in the garden. But clearly, what occurred to me was that if this was true, my children were too young to be the ones to try to understand if this problem existed and be the ones to act. And therefore, I felt this sudden burden on my shoulders that, oh my goodness, the adults of today, we have to be the ones to figure out if this is happening and what is it that we're going to do. So now I'm a little bit of a research-oriented nerd. I like to study things a lot, and the very next step, I spent the next 3 months with all my free time reading books, watching videos to see whether or not climate change was actually happening. And I came to 3 conclusions. Number 1, the temperature of the planet is definitely rising. Number 2, humans are the likely cause of this increase in temperature. But number 3, that our political leaders were doing absolutely nothing about that. And that third item just got me so angry that even I, a normal person, in 3 months studying this, I could figure out that we had an urgent problem on our hands. How come our government leaders were like, this is not happening? I was enraged. Since we're in church, I won't use stronger language, but I was not happy. And so I resolved, I said, well, if they're not going to do something, then at least I am going to try to do something. But how am I, just one person, going to solve this huge problem like climate change? It seemed like daunting. Now, at the time, I'm from California. I live half-time in Indianapolis now, setting up the solar factory, but I come from California, and I was running my own company, an advertising agency. We made TV commercials, radio ads, billboards, and it was a company I had set up and founded myself. We had 30 people. We had great clients. We had been running for 17 years. You know, everything in my life was just fine until I saw that darn movie. Because every day I would come back from work, and at nighttime I'd be brushing my teeth in the mirror, and I would ask myself, what did I do today to be part of the solution to the climate change? And every day I would have the same answer: absolutely nothing. I was busy with our clients. I was busy with my employees. I was caught in traffic. I was busy with my kids' activities. I had all the excuses. And it wasn't before long that, in facing myself every day in the mirror, that I realized not only was I not part of the solution like I committed myself to be, but I was part of the problem, because I knew climate change was happening, and yet I still did absolutely nothing about it. And that got me depressed. I would go to work and I couldn't pay attention in meetings anymore. I just would know that I would come and face myself in the mirror each night. I realized that I was no longer living a life that was consistent with my values. And I realized I had to actually quit my company, sell my company, push the restart button on my life, and start over again and try to figure this out. So that's actually how I eventually quit advertising, got into the solar energy business in 2009 with the idea that the more solar energy we have, then the less we rely on polluting fossil fuels. So I could, at least in my day job, go to work and be happy that I was contributing to be part of the solution. But 5 years later, the solution was not getting any better, and so I actually resigned from all my nonprofit work, and I committed all my free time to climate action and climate activism, and actually getting trained by former Vice President Al Gore, as Brittany mentioned, to give talks about and educate the public on the facts, the latest facts about the climate crisis. And so that's what brings me here accidentally to you today, having seen a movie and trying to decide what I was going to do personally. And let me just preview this by saying I was depressed back then. I was very concerned that we were not going to solve this problem in my lifetime for my children's sake and all of our children's sake. But today I'm actually much more hopeful. I found that when I thought there was nothing I could do, that there were many things that I could do and that I've done. And I will share some of those with you. And I want to hear what you've been all doing as well, so that we can have a conversation here today as we focus on planet Earth, which is the first picture here and the first image I want to share with you. This slide was taken on Christmas Eve, 1968, by the first of the Apollo missions. And it was the first picture taken by a human being of our planet from outer space. It's the big blue marble, as it's known. This is called Earthrise, one of the most famous photographs in history. And what it reminds me of is that we share one planet together, this delicate blue marble. And it's actually the only planet in the universe known to sustain life. And that means life for humans, life for animals, and all species. It's incredibly precious and incredibly delicate. This image was taken 3 weeks ago by the Artemis II moon astronauts that just came back. They were trying to recreate Earthrise, and so they called this Earthset. And as an honoring for that photograph from 1968. How timely that we're having this opportunity to look at that today. Now, what's been happening since 1968 when the first photo was taken and the next photo that was taken just last month? This is an animation of the temperature of our planet going back to 1880 when weather instruments were begun until the present, with blue being colder than average and yellow and red being warmer than average. And as we get to the 80s, and 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, we see a lot more yellow and red, right? In fact, if we look at this data on a chart from 1880 to the present, there is a clear trend, as I mentioned before, that the temperature of the planet is rising. In fact, 10 of the hottest years ever measured have been the last 10 years. And the last 3 years, 2005, 4, and 3 were the hottest years ever measured on the planet. These are not records that we are proud of or that we can continue to go on because there are consequences. Some of the consequences in April of 2022, these heat waves melted some glacial lakes in India and Pakistan. So here's a short video of the impact. We can see that some of the infrastructure that we as humans have made may not be ready for the future that's coming before us. So why is the temperature of the planet getting warmer? So here's just a little bit of science. You probably already know it, but this is a picture taken by the International Space Station of our atmosphere from the side. And sometimes on a beautiful day like today when we came in, I look up at the blue sky saying, wow, that's like infinite. The sky is infinite. How can we puny human beings do anything that would affect the atmosphere? But it turns out that blue atmosphere is actually very thin. And if I had an apple, the thinness of the skin on that apple is the relative thinness of the atmosphere to planet Earth. So it's very thin and very delicate. The actual distance from here to the top of the sky is only the distance from here to Indianapolis Airport, about 7 miles as the crow flies. It's very, very shallow. So when we fill that thin shell of atmosphere with something called greenhouse gases, it provides an insulating effect and causes the planet's temperature to rise. This is a chart that just shows a couple of the different ways of sources of greenhouse gases, everything from the thawing permafrost, which will release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, air transport, and anything burning fuels will lead to carbon dioxide combustion, forests burning, even industrial agriculture, cows who are burping methane. But the largest source of global warming pollution is actually just one item on that list. It's the burning of fossil fuels, which since 1850, when the first oil well was drilled, does anybody know what state the first oil? Pennsylvania? There we go. Extra credit today. Thank you. But you see the industrial age happening in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and really to the present. The world has consumed a lot more fossil fuels. But so what? What does it matter if the temperature of the planet rises a little bit? What's the consequence of a warmer planet? So there are many, but I only have time to share a couple things. One is that warmer air can hold a lot more water vapor. We actually know that every time we get out of the shower, right? The shower, whereas the warmer air up here holds more moisture than the colder air at the bottom of the shower. So this is a science lesson that we know every single day. But with the science behind it is that for each additional 1 degree centigrade of temperature rise, the atmosphere can actually hold 7% more water vapor. So what's been happening on our planet so far is that there is already about 5 to 15% more water vapor in the atmosphere compared to 50 years ago. And so let's take a look at where that water vapor goes when it's up in the atmosphere, because it actually doesn't spread around the planet evenly. The water and moisture aggregates into these things called atmospheric rivers in the sky. And these animations can show a little bit about how those rivers aggregate. And we all know what goes up must come down, right? So if there's more moisture in the air, that's more water up in the air, eventually it's going to come down. And it's coming down these days in something called a rain bombs that have happened anywhere from Montana. Here's a picture of one in Phoenix, Arizona. Here's one in Midland, Texas. And how many of you knew that a rain bomb hit Indianapolis last Friday, 2 days ago, right? We heard about the 80-mile-an-hour winds. We got the warnings on our phone about tornado. Actually, it wasn't the swirling tornado. What it was the rain bomb, which is cold air. How can we have 70-degree temperature the day before, and we had hail on Friday? It's because exactly a signature of these rain bombs where cold air drops down forcefully, and then the wind at 70 or 80 miles an hour spreads out and causes damage. Here's a little video. Look at all that hail coming down. You guys experienced that. Scary, wasn't that? We have ourselves. This means that the climate crisis is not far away. It's right here hitting us in downtown Indianapolis just on Friday. One very sad thing I saw from Friday's incident was this mobile home park on the west side of Indy, that trees fell down and crushed the homes here. And it reminds me that the most vulnerable communities are the ones that pay the highest consequence of climate change. These are the communities. Do you think they have insurance? And even so, how long will it take to get their home fixed? There's an interview of a father and his young children there saying, what am I going to do? This tree fell on my house. Luckily, nobody was killed over at the mobile park. But whether we look locally on disadvantaged communities bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, or if we look overseas, like in the Philippines, where their hurricanes are hitting the Philippines greater and greater force due to their geographic location, or people living on island nations where the water's rising. Those communities, I think, as an ethical and moral issue, I feel that it's imperative that rich countries like the United States, that we do take action. But let me change topics, and so far I've been talking about air temperature. Let's talk a little about ocean heat temperature, because we see similarly that the temperature of the ocean has been rising. Most 50% of the increase in temperatures happened just in the last 20 years. And when you have warmer oceans, you also have warmer and more powerful hurricanes. And so we saw, for instance, Hurricane Milton in 2024 making landfall. You can see an image here, but the damage in Florida, they got 2 feet of rain from that hurricane the next day. That hurricane moved through Florida. You could see the extensive damage in Fort Pierce.
海上夕陽分段收費。
How can you imagine riding on the bus like that with so much water out there? So those are some of the consequences of warmer temperatures. But I want to also point out that warmer air, while it evaporates more moisture and we have too much water, and sometimes we also find the situation where it's evaporating water out of the soil and we're getting more droughts at the same time. So around the world, this is a photo I took in California of a nearby lake, which you could see is much, much lower than its average, maybe 50% of its volume. But over in China, the drought has stricken them, and they've had a lack of water. Here's a photo in Brazil where the Rio Negro has reached its lowest point in history. Over in France a few years ago, major rivers were down low. So too much water, too little water. In general, the World Health Organization has said that the climate change is the single biggest threat to health facing humanity. And by that, when we talk about just the air pollution caused by the burning of coal in countries like China, which rely 80% on coal, here's a picture in their winter time on January 12th, and then January 16th, when you could see just the amount of coal burning and what that can do if the wind blows the wrong way. Unfortunately, in China, the newborn babies have a life expectancy 5.5 years shorter than in other parts of China where they don't burn as much coal. So the life expectancy is down. And in Poland, a baby born in Warsaw today inhales the equivalent of 1,000 cigarettes in its first year of life. So this is a global problem, not just one that all citizens of the world are facing. So there's a big cost to carbon emissions that we won't have time to go through. Everything from political instability, we talked about floods, we didn't talk about wildfires, but all the things listed here, and really, frankly, it is a threat to the global economy as well. So that was a lot of unhappy news, and I promise that I will give you some more positive news, because that's what made me depressed before. But what has inspired me over the last 20 years is that we have actually many solutions at hand. Here are just some of them to show you that the technologies that solve these problems are not something we have to wait 100 years for. They're actually here today. And if we could deploy them, they would actually reduce emissions by 50% in this decade. Here's just some images showing of wind power, solar power, battery storage, regenerative farming, driving an electric vehicle, heat pumps, energy efficiency or LED lighting. I was very pleased to see 2 weeks ago the sermon about the green team here and the sustainability initiatives. How many of these things on this are you already doing the last 17 years? Give yourself a round of applause, right? You've got a solar array there. You've changed 500 or more light bulbs, or 5,000, a huge number of light bulbs. You were studying the energy efficiency of your building here. You've put heat pumps in. So you are well along your path to participate in the solutions. Now, if only we could get the rest of the world to participate in this as well. The International Energy Agency said we can get to net zero emissions if everybody, like your congregation, participates. And I don't expect you to be able to see all this go by, but this is just a chart to say if we're at a high level of emissions and we do things like having more electric vehicles, more heat pumps, retrofitting 50% of existing buildings retrofitted, and so on, more heat pumps, you can see that there's an overall way to bend down the curve and get to a net zero society by 2050. Just barely in time for us to avoid the worst of the consequences. I took the opportunity to look up the power mix of AES, the electricity provider for this region, just to see how they were doing. And this is a little bit hard to see, but on the top chart on 2014, it shows in dark blue that they provided about 80% of the electricity came from coal-fired power plants here in Indiana, 80%. But in just the last 12 years, they have gone from 80 down to 0% of coal in the current 2026 range, right? And if we look forward a couple years, they are converting a lot of that to gas, natural gas, which is not wonderful, but it is a little cleaner. But more importantly, 40% is coming from solar, wind, and batteries. And so this is also a success story right here in our community. I wanted to give some examples of what people are doing around the world. In England, the UK is generating more than 26 times as much electricity from renewables than coal back in 2022. But in 2024, they actually also closed their last coal plant. So the coal-fired energy was invented in the UK, and so they have actually symbolically been one of the first to abolish that. The good news is that wind energy is rising very, very quickly as a clean form of energy, and if we just built wind farms we could power the world 40 times over with wind. In solar energy, which is my industry, it's been also growing rapidly. Remember, I told you I quit my job in 2009 to be a marketing person for solar. So you can all thank me later for the progress that we made. Just kidding. The real reason, of course, is that the price of solar energy has fallen so dramatically from the $70 a watt down to like 11 cents a watt, like a 99% decline. And what it means that the first 5 years I worked in the industry, electricity from solar and wind was only cheaper than coal in 1% of the world. So it was really hard to be a marketing person trying to sell something that expensive. But 5 years later, by 2019, solar was cheaper in 2/3 of the world. And very soon, solar and wind are the lowest forms of electricity generation in the world. And if we go take a look at this information on a chart, you can see how the cost of coal-powered energy has been flat over the years, natural gas flat to declining, nuclear slightly rising, wind is declining, but solar has come down a lot. And if I was to look at the next 10 years of energy costs, I think that solar, I'm so optimistic that we don't have to talk politics. We just look at the price of something. It's going to be better to be going renewable energy. The Vatican has stated that they want to be the first carbon neutral state in the world. They, have two advantages. Number one, they're very, very small. And number two, God is on their side. So what can we do? Let's talk about what we can do in a community. And when I ask the question, what can we do, who's the we? This is a chart that shows the carbon pollution by country all over the world. It's a little small, but the bigger the bubble, the bigger the polluter. And it turns out the two biggest bubbles here are China and the United States. China in blue and the United States in red. Together, we emit about 43% of all the world's carbon pollution. We're the biggest problem makers. Now, as a Chinese American, I feel a little doubly guilty. Sometimes I feel guilty, but I try to have a positive attitude and say, maybe I could be part of the solution in both countries because of that. And I would like to say that to all of you here as the American side of the equation. We have made a big mess, but it means that we have the biggest opportunity to clean up that mess compared to, the French are not going to come clean up our mess. We Americans, we have to clean up our mess. And I really think that Chinese and Americans, that we are actually the key to life on planet Earth. If you think about it, if we two countries do not act, if we do not hold hands and work together, what is the rest of the world going to do? So I take this as a positive challenge that we are able to make change, and it inspires me. And I hope it inspires you. And I know what you've been doing is already a steady approach. So let me just share a couple of my approaches. We can take personal action, we can take civic action, we can take global action. Some things I've done back in 10 years ago, I put solar panels on my roof. I got a Nissan Leaf electric car. I removed all the fossil fuels at my home in 2019 to go all electric. There's heat pump technology. There are even electric fireplaces. I got an induction cooktop, heat pump mini splits. You've done that in your congregation here. And I noticed there was a question on the green team that asked who's changed their diet. Well, about 7 years ago, I never thought I could be a vegetarian or vegan. It would be, well, that's impossible for me. But some friends told me, you don't have to be 100% vegan in order to help. Just maybe one day a week, if you ate a vegetarian diet, it would help. And I had meatless Mondays, and then before long, it became Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and now maybe 60 to 80% I've switched my diet. So I don't feel like I have to go 100% to be useful, but either whatever you could do is helpful already. So, and I thank you, all of you who have already discovered that path. From a civic action point of view, I've joined nonprofits that work on climate. Yep, that's me. It's easier to work on climate with other people and not feel so lonesome. So there's so many groups that you can join that participate. In 2014, at the age I was then about 50 years old, I wrote my very first letter to the editor. How many people here have written a letter to the editor? Thank you. Like, it took me 50 years to do that, but it mattered, right? To just say, what's on your mind? Speak up. Use our voices to ask for change. And a few years ago, I noticed that a 16-year-old was actually out there marching in the streets, Greta Thunberg. I said, well, gee, if she's marching in the streets, what am I doing? Maybe I should get out there too. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I've never in my life marched up to Capitol Hill, but I got up there on the youth climate strike and showed that I was supporting youth action on climate. So there's always something new that we can do. We're never too old to start to do something we haven't done before. And that was what inspires me about climate action, because there just are, when I thought there was nothing I could do, it turns out there is so much that that is available for us to be done. And the planet really needs us to start taking action soon. I mentioned we had 30 to 40 years. 20 years has already gone by. We've seen Friday's rain bomb on us. And so timing is urgent to act for our planet. So I urge those of you that we can use our voices to talk more. We can use our votes on who we elect into office. We can choose what we're going to eat and how we power our homes and what we drive. I realized there were so many things that we could do. And so today I'm much hopeful about my children's future. That's a more recent picture of my family. In fact, my daughter, I was only going to share my joy that my daughter got married last Saturday. And it was one of the most wonderful, wonderful experiences that I'm trying to continue and feel the pleasure of. But I'm much more hopeful for her future. And I am here to really share my story of how if you're feeling distressed, but there's nothing like action as an antidote to distress. So thank you so much for having me as your speaker today. I want to leave a little bit of time for you to ask any questions, or maybe raise your hands and just share what you might be doing in your household that is part of the solution to the climate crisis, or share any concerns you may have. Brittany, we have a few minutes to do that, and someone has a microphone that will be coming around. So who would be the brave person to raise their hand first? Please identify yourself. And
Hi, I'm Jay Harvey. I just had a question. What is the definition of net zero?
The definition of net zero is when the amount of greenhouse gases that we're putting out versus the amount that we're taking in is neutral and not rising. So one thing that we're measuring is how much carbon pollution is out there that's rising. So if we can get that number back down again and have less greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, so that we're certainly going to always emit some, but the trees here, through photosynthesis, absorb carbon and put it into their trunks, and so they're a form of negative emissions. And so if we can get back into balance, that's what net zero means. Thank you for the question.
Hey, my name's Jim. Thanks for coming in.
Hi, Jim.
I was curious. You asked a question early on in your presentation that was that it remarked at the easy availability of the information you presented to us today, and that there's no barrier or gate that keeps someone from understanding this topic. So you were sort of grappling with why would our elected leaders be taking no action or performative action or even taking us backward on this topic? I'm curious if you ever answered that question for yourself.
That's a tough one. It's a quandary, right? Why can we understand the facts and still not take action? I do think that the fossil fuel industry has a lot of money. They're one of the richest industries in history, and so they have a lot of incentive from shareholders to persist, right? So it's just a business thing that they would be doing. I'm a business person, so I get it, right? I'm in PR. I get that too. All the PR and all the marketing, you could hire me. And I understand the marketing and PR that's happening and the way that money is used to drive political decision making. I object to that, but it is the way our society is set up, and so we've got to find a way to work against that, and we're winning. And partly I feel like I'm a business person, so I'm trying to find business solutions to the climate crisis and ways to just get solar to be cheaper than fossil fuels so that it's not a political question. It just becomes an easy question. But I'm mystified as much as you why our political leaders will not do the right thing here. Thank you. The next question, yes.
Hi, I'm Paula. You mentioned that AES is using a lot more wind and solar power, which is great, but they're still charging us more every year. And so what I'm wondering is there any justification for that increase, or is it just corporate greed? I mean, does it cost more to make the transition to solar and wind, or why is that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, which is, why are electricity rates rising in this region, especially that solar and wind energy are lower and lower in cost. And so it's very localized question. This is the way that utilities are set up around the country. It's extremely complicated question that you've asked. And I don't know the answer here for AES. Except that they do have to try to justify all the cost increases. And so that in itself is a political battle where they are trying to every utility wants to pass cost on to the ratepayer. And so we need to have a watchful eye over those all those very arcane hearings that allow that to happen. And again, there's a lot of money that's happening to and influence. And so we're really up against that too. Thanks for the question. Who has the microphone next?
My name is Dan, and I just want to piggyback on what you said about watchful eyes. I think you might have mentioned this in your presentation, but one of the things we can do is donate to organizations that are playing that watchful eye and bringing lawsuits against the administration as it tries to turn back the clock on doing clean energy. And there are a number of organizations that are effective. You can go online and find them, and I encourage people to support them.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your comments.
My name is Don DeWeese. I'm curious about the carbon footprint of conventional warfare. And for example, we have Ukraine and so on and so forth. But the footprint would include how much pollution is caused to make these explosives, how much it costs in terms of carbon to deliver those explosives, and more importantly, what on earth is it going to cost to replace all that? I mean, cement alone, is a great carbon sink or footprint.
Yeah, no, another tough question, the cost of the war, which it's such a complicated topic. I have started to see some reports and analysis of what is the carbon cost of the war. But I think it's a new area of research, and you could just imagine that it's something extremely significant. So thank you for that comment. All right, let's continue on. And I also want to encourage some of our younger participants in the audience to raise your hand if you have a question, or if you could share, if you would be brave enough to share something you're doing in your household that might be environmentally friendly. I'd love to hear from our young congregants. But let's go to the next microphone.
My name is Patrick Bakel. What are some of the questions that you find are posed by critics of renewable energy sources, and what questions are they asking, and what are some of the answers that you found to those questions?
Okay, so some of the criticism that I've heard about, say, solar energy is that it's costly up front, right? You have to pay for the whole system up front, but then you basically, it's free for the next 25 years because solar systems are typically warranted to last for 25 years. So there is just a sense that the cost is prohibitive. There are also people who will say that solar uses critical minerals or and that are hard to find. And I would say that that is absolutely not true. Silicon, which is what we use, silicon chips in our computers and our phones, and silicon is what the solar panels are made from. Silicon is the second most abundant material on planet Earth after oxygen. And so it is actually available everywhere. It's very equitable, and it's non-toxic. And so there again, wearing my PR and marketing hat, there's a lot of incorrect myths that are propagating and being paid for to be propagated out on the internet that are simply untrue from the facts. But it's hard to keep battling those myths down, so we've got to be diligent about that. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's go on to this side of the room. And we've got 2 more minutes or 2 more questions. 2 more questions to go.
Hi, my name is Alan Schmidt, and there are 2 prime examples probably in the world of 2 countries, Germany and the UK, which have implemented net zero policies or are striving for that. Electricity costs 45 cents a kW in Germany, and it has caused significant industrial deindustrialization in the country, causing labor unrest, and 45 cents a kW would probably make it very expensive to live in my home. And how do you address these costs and the actual societal disruptions from arriving at net zero? And this is a real world example, not somebody's theoretical example.
Yeah, thank you. I know that in a state like Indiana, which electricity might cost 11 or 12 or 15 cents a kilowatt hour, in California, we're already at 45 or 55 cents a kilowatt hour. In Hawaii, it's close to 60 some odd cents a kilowatt hour. And so definitely energy costs are rising worldwide regardless of fuel source. But we saw from the chart the trends of what the trends are and what will be the cheapest moving forward. I think at least in California, where for 30 or 40 years, the economy of California has been growing and the GDP is growing. Energy efficiency has been increasing and improving while electricity prices are going higher. So it hasn't yet been a drag on the economy because there are other benefits of renewable energy there. So I think the economics of it is extremely complicated, but I think at the end of the day, we have to say, is price the most important thing that we value, or what about all the other costs that have to be built into the equation about damage and so on and so forth? So I think that's a really complicated topic. But what you bring up is definitely a very day-to-day challenge of how we are going to address this transition. This is an energy transition. It is not going to be easy, but the solutions are there, and we're looking for more of the early adopters to grow and bring the cost down over time. It won't come down instantly, but this is just in the last 10 years made great progress. Thank you. I'm going to be here afterwards. I'm happy to talk afterwards. We can do, Brittany says, 1 more question, right?
How do you think
which kid is going to want to tell us a little bit about what are you doing in your homes that's an environmentally friendly activity? Somebody want to raise their hand and share? Little too, okay, you can share with me afterwards. All right, well thank you.
We representative over here.
All right,
And
we'll
I know
do-
she wanted her chance. So what a better
One more,
occasion,
one
right?
more
Because,
comment, yes.
Ray, you know, and I know he'd appreciate.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the wonderful information that's been presented this morning. We're going to have some sheets out there that have nothing to do with solar, but they're things you can incorporate into your everyday life that you sometimes may not think of to lower things like the use of plastic bags, which are also produced as a byproduct of the oil industry and things like that. And I have a sheet that I'm going to copy shortly, and they'll be available to everyone at the table outside. Thank you again.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you to the Green Team. Thank you, everybody, for having me today. It's my pleasure.